Nosferatu, My First Castle Panic, and Civilization. This is Staying In.
So, Kris, I asked Sam this question the last time that we recorded.
Yes, okay.
And that is that, what do you think it says about our podcast that we've done 2 Tuna Buses in a row?
I know. Ironically, it is like buses.
Yeah, they all come along at once, right?
They all come along at once. I don't know. It's that time of year, perhaps. It's time of recording. A slightly wintry period. There's lots of bugs and viruses going around.
Oh, isn't there?
Things. I couldn't make the last recording because I had received some kind of flu, head cold thing from members of my family over the Christmas period.
Should we talk about it? Because I feel like people who listen to us in the UK will know, but people who listen to us, and we've got lots of listeners who live outside of the UK, they won't know that the UK is basically Basically, the Brits are sending around one cold. You know, we're always seen as tight-fisted. Well, we're sending around this cold. There's flu and COVID about, and then there's also this other one. I think Nora's doing the rounds.
Yes,
bless her. And
going door to door. And basically, it's basically destroyed the UK economy, as far as I can tell. Yeah. I mean, I don't not wanting to make this one of those political satire shows, but I think there might be other factors at play.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
I mean, I'm not an economist, but I'll take a rough stab in the dark. There might be other factors at play.
But I work with people, and they've had 1 or 2 days off work, so I'm fairly confident that's the cause of all of our major economic woes.
You see, now I didn't take any days off work, and I'm not saying that's a good thing.
Kris.
But what I did say to myself was, look, okay, I wasn't in any pain. It was just like a cattle grid, essentially. It was just slowing me down. I said to myself and all my colleagues, look, I'm going to be at 70% this week, just so you're aware.
Yeah.
There should be no expectation. I should be at 100% because you'll just lose me. I'll be off ill. So 70%. Obviously, listener, if you're actually ill, you're in pain, don't
take a day off.
No job is that important.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just the case of just the sniffles, where it was just kind of irritating more than anything.
That's do you know what though? That's the worst when you're off ill, because, or that's the worst when you're ill because you think to yourself, I can struggle into work. I can do it. I'm not ill enough to take the day off. That's the worst.
Yeah, and. A happy byproduct, though, was my voice dropped by an octave.
Yeah, you're sounding slightly more sultry than normal.
I know.
It's quite.
It was extraordinary. Like, that was the only happy byproduct of it all, was that my voice went to this very satisfactory, as my wife called it. She'd just go, "Oh, here comes Barry."
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
But I think it would have just been a very. If anything, I think it would just be too much power in the voice if we'd all rallied round and attended the pod. I think it was only fair on the listeners' ears that they had just a kind of a stereo version of it rather than the full surround sound experience of the four of us.
Do you know, I used to work with this person who used to be my boss, and she used to say to me, do you know, I put your podcast on to set the baby off to sleep. And I'm like, oh, that's really sweet. Do you listen as well? No. And you know what? Fair enough.
Yeah, it's. I find that I listen to my audiobooks generally at night, and I prefer to listen to audiobooks and podcasts because typically in an audiobook there's no music. There's no ads for LinkedIn or Indeed. I mean, I'm giving them free publicity now, but and there are certain voices. Here's an interesting one. Who's your go-to audiobook voice?
Jonathan Keeble.
Now, is that the chap who did the H.P. Lovecraft stuff that you got me to listen to?
No, it's the guy. He's basically Mr. Warhammer and Mr. Historical books. So, he's the guy who you go to if you want to hear, if you want to hear how Horus fell to the Eye of Chaos, or what it was really like living in Rome.
Okay, without obviously doing an impression, describe the qualities of the voice, the timbre, tempo.
It's very powerful, like down here, and it's very forthright, and he's able to very eloquently talk like this. And he's got a very. It sounds like, and by the way, just Jonathan Keeble does approximately a bajillion audiobooks, so I don't. This can't be the case, but he sounds like he cares about every single word, right? Like every single word is really, really important, and it's nice because it gives you a sort of pep.
Okay,
I wouldn't fall asleep to it personally. I think I
was about to say that. Yeah, that'd be quite intense.
If you're going to go to bed though and listen to an audio person, Kris, like whose voice is like?
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it. So
Cool.
It's Hugh Fraser.
Is that the Agatha Christie lot?
Yes, who played Captain Hastings in the TV series Hercule Poirot.
Yes,
and did basically all the audiobooks. He does a better Poirot voice than David Suchet.
I would broadly agree with that, Kris.
That's a safe stance to have, Peter.
It is, isn't it?
But that kind of slightly posh but charmingly befuddled voice is very soothing to listen to.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
At night. I know I've mentioned it on the pod, but I'll mention it again. One of the most extraordinary gifts I got given once was a collection of Sherlock Holmes stories. It was towards the later part of Holmes's life when he's retired to Sussex and he's keeping bees on the Sussex Downs
after the waterfall.
Yeah. After, well, it's twice after Reichenbach after actually. I got this audiobook series on CD, and I thought, great. Typically I listen to audiobooks to get to sleep at night, occasionally when I'm driving. And I thought, oh, who's reading this? And I looked, and it was Christopher Lee. And that is not a voice that would send you to sleep.
No.
It would send you to a few places, but sleep is not one of them. And that's an extraordinary voice, a very deep, very austere voice.
On paper, Christopher Lee is an ASMR expert, but in reality, it just doesn't work.
No. So, I think hopefully one of the reasons why listeners have stayed with us is they don't find our voices too grating. And I think we all complement each other very well. It can be tricky sometimes when you're listening to a group of people presenting a podcast, being able to tell them all apart. I think we're distinctive enough. Yeah, between your sort of eloquence, between my happy-go-lucky attitude and Sam's sort of his detailed effervescence, exuberant,
and the exuberance, and Dan's French accent, I think we really, I think we all work out quite nicely.
Speaking of Christopher Lee, Sam and I
go on.
Went and saw Nosferatu the other day.
Okay,
along with my wife, actually went to go and see Nosferatu.
So I obviously, new listeners, I don't know much about movies. So Nosferatu, what I do know is that there was a Nosferatu movie like 100 years ago, and then there's a new one.
Yes, so this was the original Nosferatu was in 1922 by F.W. Murnau. I remember studying it when I did media studies at college, and the whole reason for its existence was that the director wanted to do Dracula but couldn't get the rights from the Stoker estate.
Perfect.
So what they did was they did their own variant of it, where you get some of those familiar touchstones, but it really kind of streamlines the narrative.
Okay.
And I was in two minds about whether I wanted to talk about this or not, really. And I know that Sam didn't speak about it in the last episode, which perhaps is quite telling, because I had a chat with Sam about this recently. Because we had one of those things where, like, when you're both travelling out to go to the cinema, you sit in a film that is, over 2 hours long, you walk out and it's like, okay, the cinema looks like it's closing up now. Do we just stand here in the foyer and just kind of talk about the film, or do we just go bye and just head off to the
as if this
cars?
never happened?
Yeah. So, and sometimes also we deliberately do it because we want to kind of share our views on the pod, but I generally didn't know what sound made of it until we had a chat on the phone. And for those who aren't aware of what this film is, it basically the premise is that you have a character called Ellen, who, when she's quite young, and this is set in the kind of 1830s in Europe, when she's quite young, she has this dream, quasi-nightmare, where she calls to this mysterious figure and kind of pledges her soul to this thing. And fast forwarding like 8 years later or so, she's all settled in Germany with a new husband. And unbeknownst to her, she's kind of awakened this spirit. And in pure kind of coincidence, her husband, who's trying to rise, Thomas, who's trying to rise high in the legal profession, ends up being asked to take on a case where he has to travel out to kind of Transylvania, to this castle, a little bit like the castle we went to with Sam in Germany, but a lot darker.
Neuschwanstein.
Yeah, a bit like Neuschwanstein, and to meet the mysterious and reclusive Count Orlok, who is intending to sell up and move to this city. And unbeknownst to Thomas, it's with a view that the Count will be closer to Thomas's wife, Ellen. And that's the kind of plot in a nutshell, really. I say plot, that's the premise in a nutshell, I should say. And it's really weird watching this film because stylistically speaking, it is incredible to look at. And I know that your partner's seen this film, and I've not had a chance to speak to them about it. And I know, obviously, they are an artist, and I imagine that they are very much interested in the kind of visual acuity of the director's work. And this comes from Robert Eggers, whose films, I must admit, I've not seen. The Witch, The Lighthouse, The Northman, and now we have Nosferatu. And I watched this film, and it is beautiful to look at. There's some incredibly astonishing shots that will linger with me. It's just dripping with this kind of gothic romance. And one thing I found quite interesting is that a lot of the lighting in it is natural. So whether it be a fireplace or candlelight, and what they'll have is behind the camera lots of mirrors, just magnifying the natural light that's already there. But they're not really adding anything extra to it. And, there's thousands of rats, I don't know, that they've hired for the film. And it feels like the presence of Orlok is pervading every frame, really. But I know it sounds really silly, but I just didn't find it scary. And I'm not saying that necessarily as a criticism. I was trying to put my finger on what it was. Whether it was the case that I know the Dracula narrative, it's one of my favourite novels, and I know all the beats.
Yep.
Even though this doesn't stick to it verbatim, it does its own thing, it streamlines it, as I said. Or whether I just found it so too beautiful to be horrific, necessarily speaking. And that might be, subjective, because there are horrific moments in this, but it's done with this very romanticised, melodramatic quality. And that melodrama manifests also in the acting and in the music, that I couldn't quite kind of suspend my disbelief and fully give in to the horror, as it were.
Which actors are in it? Like any actors? I mean, I doubt I know them, but I'm sure somebody listening will.
So you've got Ellen, is played by Lily Rose Depp, who I must admit I've not seen in any performances before, but she delivers an astonishing performance of this extremely troubled individual who is kind of completely bewitched and possessed by the Count. The Count himself is played by Bill Skarsgård, who, I mean, we were talking about voices earlier. He went and worked with a vocal coach to drop his voice an octave lower. And it is extraordinary. It is.
I mean, why put all that effort in when you can just go and get a cold?
Yeah, Exactly. Maybe that's what he did.
Send him a letter.
Yeah.
But it works out nicely.
It works lovely, and he has a very distinctive look, which is actually more faithful, I say in quotation marks, to the actual look of Dracula as described in the novel. And it's one I've never seen portrayed in this particular manner at all on screen. And they've deliberately kept the appearance of the Count a secret in all the promotional stuff. You only see him, and even then, when you're first introduced to him, it's all very hazy and blurred and in silhouette, and it just adds to this mystery. And you just see him through the eyes of others who are absolutely terrified of this presence there. Because if you think about the classic Nosferatu film of the early 20s, even if you've not seen the film, you've probably seen that clip of that long shadow going up the staircase.
Yeah.
And Eggers really plays on that. So in the trailer, you see as the camera swoops over this German town at night, you can see a shadow of his hand just reaching out across the whole town.
That's cool.
For example, it's really cool. Some really cool shots here. You've got Willem Dafoe, who's worked with Eggers before, who plays the kind of Van Helsing character in this.
He was the Green Goblin.
He was the Green Goblin, yes he was. He also worked with the Wooster Group, a fantastic performance art company in the 70s, 60s and 70s.
Yeah, fair enough. And he's like Van Helsing.
He is like the Van Helsing character, yeah.
But with the serial number filed off. He's not quite Van Helsing,
no.
Right? Like he's not actually the... And he's not... So, because I guess Van Helsing, Mina... Harkin or whatever it is
so Jonathan Harker is in this Thomas and Mina is Ellen.
Okay.
And Thomas is played by Nicholas Hoult, who's fantastic I find him a very engaging performer. And I was trying to put my finger on what it was about this film that surprised me. It's not to say I didn't like it. I did like it, but I was expecting like pure blood curdling terror that was going to grab me by the neck and stick its teeth into me. And I worked out what it was, and I was watching an interview with the director, and he watched Nosferatu, the original film, when he was 8 years old, and it had this massive effect on him. When he was a little bit older, him and his friends did a stage production of it, and that's where he learnt that he wanted to be a director. And I think also the director Eggers did some stuff in production design, so that visual acuity is very strong in their work. But the way he describes Nosferatu is he says it took that basically the director in that 20s film took the Dracula story and turned it into a fairy tale. And that's what it was. And it's not to say I don't like fairy tale narratives, but actually it made me completely reconfigure what my perspective on this film. Because what it does is it actually... what I love about Dracula is it just starts off as a horror story. It's generally terrifying.
Yeah.
Then you get to the bit on the boat, which is like Alien, essentially.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this thriller when they're chasing Dracula across Europe.
Yeah.
Now, this is a fairy tale where it's front and centre. It's about these two star-crossed lovers who have this kind of weird, twisted, gothic romance. And everyone else is just falling by the wayside because of this evil kind of love, this strange, twisted love. That's what this film is. So it's kind of a twisted love story in a really bizarre way. It's not that. Yes, it is horrific in places. But it's actually more melodramatic, and that kind of softens the edges of the horror, I would say.
I think melodrama. When I was reading Dracula, because I reread it like a year or so ago, and obviously it's an astonishing work by Stoker. And obviously just sets out the vampire, right? Like there's vampire novels before it, but ultimately it kind of just sets out de rigueur for what this whole creature thing is going to be. And there is that bit of like, as you say, like I think there is that melodrama in there because it that book was so neatly sort of punctured 20, 30, 40 years later, where you ended up with things like Northanger Abbey, for example, these novels that were really kind of critiquing and sending up the Gothic romance, the Gothic horror romance sort of genres. And so that there is a bit to that. I guess my question is like, it is a really horror-stricken novel. it sounds to me, you said fairy tale. I find that really fascinating because for me, fairy tales, I was kind of studying them recently, listened to a wonderful lecture series about them, and have been reading a bunch of them. Just literally last year, finished off the entirety of the first edition of Grimm's fairy tales. And to me, fairy tales kind of need some sort of, not even necessarily morality, because I think that comes much later in fairy tales, but it needs some kind of folky advice about the reality of the world. So like Hansel and Gretel is obviously like, don't trust strangers, right? Like, or your parents may not necessarily have the best intentions for you, or there's a bunch of other fairy tale morality tale things. Is there a piece of advice that Nosferatu is giving? I mean, obviously, other than don't fall under the spell of a weird vampire.
I mean, I've not really thought about it in that manner actually, but it's an interesting question because I think you're absolutely right. Like usually in a fairy tale, there is something of a moralizing thread underpinning it. There is one could reconfigure this. So I need to think about this more carefully. I don't know necessarily this is something that was an intention, but there is an inherent kind of feminist quality to it.
Really?
Yeah, I would say so to a degree, definitely. I'm just trying to think in terms of, without spoiling the narrative too much, in terms of what can often happen in these kind of romantic works where if there's any sense of peril, the women are kind of pushed inside whilst the men go out to try and solve that. And I think it retools that to a degree. I'm not going to say it's necessarily, trying to provide a kind of a feminist take solely on it, but I'm just trying to think of possible parallels that could be drawn here.
It's not Virginia Woolf presents Dracula, is it? But I suppose
no, not at all.
I suppose that if that is there, that is kind of appropriate, right? Because ultimately, I think the other thing that Dracula, the novel, talks about is there is a sort of there is an exploration of forbidden love in Dracula.
Very much so.
That is, I mean, it's why it was, censored or banned or whatever. Or it was certainly torn apart at the time. But there is something there that is quite empowering, I think, to women, and there is something about the outsider, I think, to Dracula. So maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I think to a degree. I think I don't think Nosferatu makes that as apparent. Like that, there isn't the I think Ellen, the character of Ellen, is very much a kind of a conflation of Mina Harker, and I think it's Lucy from the Dracula novel, if memory serves me correct.
The one who gets taken away first.
Yeah, in Whitby. Yeah. But I don't think that. I really like the character of Mina Harker. I think they're an absolutely fascinating character, and they are there. They are part of the hunters of Dracula. Yeah. We don't get that here at all, really.
Interesting.
Women, the depiction of women here, they do have a presence here. You've got, Emma Corrin, you've got Lily Rose Depp, but in terms of what they do, it is basically them worrying about themselves, worrying about each other, and worrying about their husbands. And it's their, they spend a lot of time doing that or recovering in bed, for example.
Sure.
And it's the men that are going out and actively trying to solve what's going on. And inadvertently, it's Ellen who kind of knows what is happening. And there's some interesting points here in terms of around destiny and fate, and that feels very fairy tale. There is a kind of a symmetry, a kind of an ugly symmetry, I think, that this narrative follows, which makes it feel like this dark and gothic and slightly grotesque fairy tale. And I think it was just that aspect of it being like a fairy tale that maybe clicked for me and go, okay, right. that's interesting. That's not a particular take on the Dracula story that I subscribe to, but from somebody who knows that story quite well and has seen lots of versions of Dracula, it is quite refreshing to see a different version of it. And to be honest, the selling point for me is just the way it is shot. Like the cinematography by Yarin Blaschke is phenomenal. Like for me, I'd happily just watch this with the sound off. I think there's some really great images. There's a sequence where Thomas arrives at the castle, and the carriage just turns up, and the way it appears, and the way the carriage in itself beckons him inside it, is just extraordinary.
Awesome.
So I've got a confession to make, Peter.
Okay, well, it's a safe. You're in a safe space, Kris.
I have not yet done a deep dive into the rules for Civ.
Oh, Kris.
Well, no, there's a reason for this. I did the exact same for Sam with Twilight Imperium. Is that actually I work better when I leave it not too late, but obviously like the weekend before, because when I'm playing a game that is long. And there are lots of rules that you want to be able to get very clear and right in your head, so you're not holding up the other players in what can be a very long game.
Oh, yeah.
I like to ensure that I'm fully acquainting myself with how it works and how it plays relatively close to the date, because I don't want to be the one that holds everyone up.
Yeah.
But I just want to say thank you to yourself for providing me with a very clear and comprehensive set of rules, and we have our own little chats. And I feel like I am sufficiently primed for my deep dive into those rules, really. In what is a game that, from the outside, can look quite dry. I'm also looking to host my own session at some point this year of Gibberers, the game that you and Sam very kindly got me from Essen. And I don't know. I just want to get an idea in terms of how are you feeling about it? And
I'm excited.
Any advice to me in terms of how I could prepare people for an equally long game? You know, I think my Gibbers is about 10 hours. So how I prepare my hosts for that experience in the same way you've done for us with Civ.
I mean, I think I've taken a lot of inspiration from the way that Sam has handled it twice for Twilight Imperium, because he's done such a good job of that. Yeah, I mean, so we touched upon it a little while ago, a few episodes back, but basically, we're going to be playing Civilization, the original tabletop game, at my place. This is a game by Avalon Hill, and it is, as you say, it's big. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about it more, the actual game itself, later on in another podcast or something like that, because we've not played it yet. But the top level is... Sid Meier, who made the video game, played the tabletop game and went, what if that, but on a computer? And made some changes and, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, if you've ever played the video game and gone, oh, that's quite complex, and it feels like a bit of a board game, it's because it is. And it is. So, Civilization, the tabletop game by Avalon Hill, it also was put out by Gibson. It's about a 10 to 12 hour long game at 7 players, which is the maximum that it will go up to player count wise with just the original Civilization set that came out. There are more bits and pieces for it. There's a sort of standalone expansion called Advanced Civilization, and there are 2 smaller expansions for Civilization, which can push the player count up to, I think it goes up to 8. The game later would go on to have things like Mega Civilization. Then there was like something like Western Empires and Eastern Empires, and lots of people have taken this idea and basically brought it back into life. Very similar rules, but it's known as a bit of a massive game, and as I say, it's an all-day affair. Like, it is a 10 to 12-hour game. I've been on BGG, like, asking for bits and pieces of advice and all that sort of stuff. So the way that I've been preparing for it is we've got that little WhatsApp group between the players, and And I think that's really important to like do all the coordination stuff, which I think I've kind of taken from a lot of the RPG organizing that I've done in the past and continue to do, where like part of RPG groups is basically just like calendar keeping, right? Like making sure you've got enough players that day, and if you don't, making sure that like, you know, you've got something prepared or something scaled, and also making sure that they've got all the right information of what it is that they need to be able to do, making it as easy as possible to just go into play as effortlessly as you can. And I think that so for example, you mentioned like, you know, a set of rules that I provided. So again, on BGG, there is a reformatted word for word version of the rules that come in the Avalon Hill box, but it's just laid out on A4 and it's laid out nicer, right?
Yeah.
And so what I did is I downloaded that PDF. I went to the local library, printed out 8 copies of the rules, and so that I've got, you know, 8 sets of the rule sets there. So I've got one spare just in case. I printed off a little cheat sheet which talks about, for me, which is walks through all of the phases of the game, because the game has, I think it's like, you know, a dozen, maybe a few more phases that everybody kind of has to go through, and you have to do things in a certain order, and you have to do things in a very particular way, because this is ultimately it's a quote unquote war game in which war is not the optimum strategy, right? Like kind of like Twilight Imperium, kind of like Scythe, where you kind of think to yourself, oh, I'm going to get into fights all the time. And you will get into fights, but they're actually kind of suboptimal, because they kind of are just like drains of resources. Like it's just a way to kind of empty your coffers ultimately for small amounts of advantage. So put all of that together. And then obviously also sent you folks like links to, there's a really, really good explainer video on BGG about advanced Civ and Civ kind of. It gives you a good overview and run through of the game. And again, like for me, this is one of those games. And again, I think there's some RPGs that do this. Pathfinder's one. I think 5e should be one, but maybe people don't do it. Where there's a certain degree of work that each player needs to put in to enjoy the game and to allow others to enjoy the game.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think comes quite naturally to me in terms of, because basically like I've played miniatures war games for a really long time, and a lot of the fun of those games is the work that you put in beforehand, right? Buying the models, building an army, coming up with some lore for yourself, like painting the models, painting some scenery, putting it all together, reading the rules, all that sort of stuff. You've got to do so much work, and then you get to play the game, right? And to me, like I'm like, yeah, that's great, love it. I think there's a lot of board games that don't require that, and that's great. Like, obviously, you want lots of different things. And I think there's a lot of RPGs that are trying to avoid a lot of that stuff. But there are just certain games that have a certain degree of complexity whereby I think you have to get everybody on board on the same page of like, you need to know this. Otherwise, not only are you not going to have fun, you're also going to like harm the fun for others.
Okay.
Because, so for example, we talked about, it's long, right? 10 to 12 hours. This is a game whereby in the rules it says you should set a timer for this phase, because theoretically you could just go forever, right?
Yeah, like Merchants and Marauders, yeah.
Right. And like, I love that stuff, but having to prep in advance for that kind of thing. So I've got an hourglass, right? So I was like, right, here we go, hourglass, right? We're doing that. This is the amount of time that you have to make these trades, right? And it's because if you don't keep up that pace, it's really easy at the start of the day, and we're going to be starting this at probably 9 o'clock in the morning and going until 9 o'clock at night. If you don't keep up that pace, it's really easy to feel like, well, we've got 12 hours. Like, how long can it be? And for every extra 5-10 minutes that you spend trying to reread the rules or work out what you're meant to do, or what should I be doing, or like, bickering about something. For every 5 or 10 minutes that you do, if you do that every other turn, one extends the time out massively and just drag the game on. There's also, in a game this size, and Twilight Imperium is a little bit like this. I think it's actually, both the times that we've played it, it's been a little bit more balanced. But like in Civilization, you can be 3 or 4 hours from the end and know that you're not going to win.
Yeah. Right? Oh, yeah, I had that experience with Twilight Imperium.
Oh, well, there you go. Right? And you've just put 8 hours in, and you're like, there's another third of this to go, and I'm definitely not winning. And that can be like really dispiriting, but it's also kind of par for the course and kind of like, so all the rules. So I've done all that sort of stuff. That's been good. So I've been reading all the rules, been watching all those videos, sending you that stuff, sending you some advice, choosing the optional rules to include or to not include. And then the other thing is, you'll be pleased to know. So this is actually a game that I have the original Avalon Hill set, because it was very, very kindly given to me by Alex's father. It was his original set, and like it was given to him as a gift.
Wow.
It's so sweet. There's actually like on the like little, you get little pamphlets for like our upcoming games. There's literally like a handwritten note from his current wife that says like, I hope you really enjoy this. This is, it sounds dull to me, but it's genuinely a really lovely thing. And she bought it for him at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I'll get it to the table, and he's going to be joining us for this because
I know. I think the last time I played anything with him, it was probably Paranoia.
Was that Paranoia? Yeah,
the RPG that you ran.
Yeah. And he's great. Tony's amazing, and like, so I really wanted to run this for him and like get the game to the table for him. But like, so I got all these cards out, and of course it's built on like if you've ever played a really old game like 1970s, 1980s, the card stock was not what we have now, right? Like we don't have like that. Like people are like, oh, if it's not linen finish these days, people go, how dare you? But like back then, like you were lucky that the print actually stayed in the frame of the token.
Oh yeah,
right?
And you get that lovely kind of pastel coloured quality.
Oh,
I've got my father's copy of Diplomacy when he was at university. He would play. Yeah.
Great example. Yeah, great. I'd love to play Diplomacy. And so there's all of that. So I decided, well, look, this is this is not to put too fine a point on it. I certainly won't tell Tony this. This is a 40-year-old game, right? Like this is getting on to be an artifact, right? So what I did is,
well, you and I both turned 40 this year, Pete.
Right.
There you go.
Right. And like, so I look at it and I'm just like, well, this is beautiful. This needs to be preserved, and it is one of these classic games. Is very highly regarded and very, very influential. It's seen by many to be a sort of proto Euro game, which I think is wonderful that Euro games had their earliest forms in America. But all these card components, I was like, well, look, I'm going to sleeve this bad boy. So I went on to BGG, and they have, and I didn't know they had this until I sort of stumbled upon it. They have a little section where it says like, do you want to buy card sleeves for this thing? And the community on BGG, they go, right, these are the sizes that you need.
It's
and
great.
Then some weird algorithm or something like that goes, oh, okay, of all the card sleeve manufacturers, these are the people that make the sleeves to completely tally up this entire set. So if you just buy this, and this, you can sleeve the whole thing, right? So I have had to purchase, I've had to import from Germany, and I've had to import from, I think, the States, from 2 different manufacturers, these different sleeves, one of which is the only sleeve of the exact dimensions that I need, and it's actually for a totally different board game that just so happens to have the exact right size sleeves that I need. So that all came in. Managed to put all of that together. And I was just like, oh, wow. Baggied everything up. So everything's everything's ready to rock and roll. When you folks come over, the table's going to be ready. This is going to be an extended table session. I'm going to going to pull the little extensions on the table and all that sort of stuff.
We'll be eating our dinner on the sofa.
Honestly, so that's the other thing that I'm going to be thinking about, right? So I sat down with Alex and I was like, how are we going to do this? And she said, you're going to have to do like a buffet. Because that's the other thing. Like, this is 12 hours. Like, you can't just live off cola for 12 hours, right? So
I'm very glad to hear.
Have lunch. You're going to have dinner.
Yeah.
But how are we going to do that? How are we going to keep this and keep it clean, but also keep the game moving, right? So there's all of these bits of prep. And
the hourglass again, I presume.
Yeah.
You have a minute to have lunch now.
Get the roast down you now. So basically, all of this is to say it's been a ton of work, like to actually start putting this stuff together and read the rules and all that kind of thing. But for me, the enjoyment, and I think this is where you have to I think you'll probably enjoy this as well because of how you've enjoyed doing things like War of the Ring, and there's quite a bit of setup and thought that goes into that, right? I think for me, you just kind of have to enjoy the idea that this is part of what Games Workshop refers to it for their own products as the hobby. And this is part of the hobby of board games, where you don't actually very often with modern board games, you don't often get to enjoy this because everything is, I would argue, better in that, like, things are easier to set up. People sell you inserts that, will give you everything that you need, all that kind of thing, all these time-saving things. Games just designed better in that way. But for these old games, there is a kind of 1950s, like, sports car enjoyment of them, whereby part of the enjoyment is on a Saturday morning getting up and washing the car even though it's been sat in the garage for 2 weeks, right? Part of the enjoyment is getting under the hood and looking at it and making sure that all of the all of the bells and whistles are greased or whatever it is that car people do, right?
I didn't know you knew how cars worked.
Well, just send, whenever you're having engine problems, let me know and I'll do my best. But like, there is, do you know what I mean? There is like that hobby element to it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely, yeah, I'm a big believer in the build up to playing a game, where sometimes actually, like when I play like War of the Ring, and I'm one of those weird people that plays War of the Ring solo, even though it's partly a hidden movement game, so I have to hide stuff from myself, which is really weird. Sometimes actually, like, I'll play it in sessions and the first session will just be the setup, and that is really, really enjoyable.
Great
because
fun.
Particularly War of the Ring, where you've got a map, you're positioning stuff on the map, maps are great storytelling machines. You're
100%, yeah.
already kind of starting to kind of cultivate narratives within that world, really.
Same, and again, Civilization, same idea. Like, big old map. There's a big old map of the cradle of civilization.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, you're right. There is storytelling that's happening there. Like, if you're the Assyrians or you're the Italians, like, the way that your civilization is going to spread out is going to tell a story. But even just where did you decide to start tells part of a story, right? It's like, we decided to build our home on a volcano. Great. Like, you get certain advantages for doing that, you get certain disadvantages for doing that.
But what a story. We got sent a game to review.
Did we?
And it was a wonderful, happy coincidence because this is a game. This came from Fireside Games, and this game is Castle Panic, which is quite an old game, actually. The original one, like Castle Panic, 2009. Castle Panic, not too old. we're not talking like Civilization old, but fairly old, and it's had a fresh lick of paint on it, some new art, which is lovely and very cute. But it was a game I never owned and always wanted to own because I love cooperative games. And when I got into the hobby proper, it was around that time. And I remember watching an episode of Will Wheaton's Tabletop where him and his friends played this game. And I think this might have been my very first encounter with a cooperative game. And I know Pandemic gets lots of plaudits. And, you know, it's a very good cooperative game. But the first one I encountered was Castle Panic, where you work together as a group of people to protect and defend a tower or a castle, which is essentially a tower in the centre of a board. And the board itself is split into quadrants with different rings coming out. And essentially you've got to play cards to hit different creatures that are slowly, each round, encroaching one stage further inwards towards your castle. And if they're very far and you've got an archer and that matches the colour of that quadrant, you can play that card and give some damage, 1 damage to that character. And it has this lovely mechanic where each of the monsters are drawn out of a bag and they're triangular shaped. And you point them, the point that is facing the tower is their current hit point. So when they lose a health, you just rotate it. Nice. Such an elegant way to do health. So good. And it's so satisfying when you finish one and you just go, you're gone, off you go.
In the bin.
So I've been playing this with my wife and she absolutely adores this game. And it's that lovely sweet spot. And I'm a really big fan. And I know a lot of people can sometimes use this as a kind of a slightly insulting term, but I'm a really big fan of family weight games. Because family weight doesn't necessarily mean light. What it means is that it can be light, it can be heavy. But what it does is it actually tailors for those different types of player and finds a way for them to all kind of interact with each other. And this comes from Justin DeWitt. It's 1 to 6 players, 30 to 60 minutes long. And that feeling of the last line of defense where as each of these trolls and kind of goblins are kind of making their way towards the center, you know, sometimes if they hit a wall, that bit of wall will disappear unless a player can get 2 cards, 1 bricks, 1 mortar, play that and build the wall back up.
That's cool.
It's great. And there's a little bit of card. You can trade cards. You can't trade a lot of cards, but you can trade some cards to help each other around the table. And there's always that kind of Quacks and Quedlinburg style of drawing something from the bag and not knowing, okay, is this going to be good for us? Is this going to be good for us? Is this going to be really bad for us? Continues to please. And the art is gorgeous. It's still a game that holds up really, really well. And it is proof that you don't need to take a game and restore it with brand new mechanics. It still works. If it's not broke, let's not fix it.
Yeah.
Yes, let's update the art a little bit. Lovely, let's do that. But actually, like Civ, the classics still hold up very, very well.
Yeah.
And Castle Panic is a game that's going to be in our rotation because we tend to play mainly cooperative games. So, it's our new favourite.
So it sounds to me a little bit like tower defense-y, you know, that genre.
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay.
Very much so.
And how balanced is this thing? Like, do you feel like you were always on a knife edge of like, oh my god, we're just making it through, or are there moments where you're like, this is too easy or this is too hard?
No, like if you ever feel like, if you've played lots of games of this, if you're in that situation where it feels too easy, that actually should fill you with dread, because that means, a bit like buses, that you're going to get all the bad tokens that will all come at once.
Yep.
Because it's always the same tokens, you just don't know what order they're going to come in. You don't know whether you're going to get the right cards at the right time, because you may, for example, pull a tile from the bag and it won't be spawning a creature. It'll say, okay, there's been a plague, and if any of you have got knights in your hand, you have to discard them.
Oof.
For example, or it might say all monsters rotate clockwise. I think, oh my gosh, I had all my cards for green ready for the next round, and there's nobody there now in green.
That's great.
So it's always a knife edge. So you'll never really know until the end whether you're going to win or not. and that's great. That feeling.
You've played it. What player count have you managed to get it to? Just 2?
2. I have played it in the past with 4 people, but we play it between the 2 of us. And the game does mitigate for the amount of cards in your hand, depending on the number of players. It doesn't make any. I don't think it makes any special kind of concessions for the trading ability back and forth. But it feels just as tense with 2 as it does with 4, and I think what I love about cooperative games is even if you can't do something on your go, that idea you can be helpful and say, actually, yeah, I'm gonna not do much this round, but what I'm doing is I'm making sure you're in prime position to take them out because you've got all those night cards. I'm going to wait until they get to you, and you can play as many cards as you want from your hand and do a lot of damage. And it's really, really great. And the art pops. It's great for the family, genuinely. I think one of the perhaps, and I don't know if this for a fact, but perhaps one of the reasons why they've updated the art is to make it maybe a little bit more family friendly. Let's say, for example, I don't know. I found the original quite family friendly, but maybe the aesthetics dated it a little bit. I don't know, but it continues to sing for me as a cooperative game, and I do worry sometimes that in people's lists online of their favourite cooperative games, it doesn't tend to get a look in, and it really should because it's a cracking game.
It's an odd one as well because co-op games and family games, it feels like they should kind of go hand in hand, right? Like
totally,
because if you're there, if you're playing family games where there's lots of different people, the way I think of family games is like 7 to 70, right? It's the idea of like it needs to be able to hit people who love board games, couldn't care less about board games, play them once a year. Somebody who intimately understands how all of the mechanics work in board games, and somebody who is like, sorry, what do I need to roll? What are these? Okay, dice. All right, yeah, great. They're people who. It's for people who their cognitive ability might be at a different level. So, like very very young, very very old. Different walks of life, like all of these things, they have to kind of play into it. And I kind of feel like co-op games are in that sweet spot whereby if you're the person who's bringing the co-op games, right? If you're the person who's like, let's play a board game, right? If you're going for it, co-op family games feel like they should be a bigger slice of the pie than they currently are, because they're the ones where you go, no, don't worry about it, Grandad. We're all playing this together.
Exactly, yeah.
We're all playing. There is no competition in that way. Little Sarah over there, she is playing on our side. We're all going to do this, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say this because, like, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Castle Panic is because I love this game, but I have a 4-year-old nephew that has really gotten into board games.
Wow.
And I bought him for his birthday my first Castle Panic, which came out in 2019, and again by the same designer, Justin DeWitt.
Yeah.
And this takes those mechanics of Castle Panic and just makes them accessible for young children. So rather than having a tower in the centre of the board and baddies coming from 360 degrees inwards, what this is a track that winds its way along a very small board, and the castle's at the end of it, and the monsters are working their way along this track, and on certain spaces there are shapes of different colours. So you might have like a green circle on one or a red triangle on another, and all you need to do is to play a card from your hand that matches that shape and colour, and it's gone. And the box itself is like the little dungeon, the prison, so you're not killing them, you're basically putting them in prison. And my nephew's that age, he's a big believer of right and wrong, and he likes the idea of putting them in prison, and he loves this game. And I love those games where it's genuinely fun for adults as much as it is for kids. And he says, can we play it again? I'm like, yeah, this is great fun. I like this because I love Castle Panic, and this gives me what I want from Castle Panic. But I'm able to play it with a 4-year-old. This is great. My nephew is getting as much fun out of this as I do with the bigger game. And he's already asking about the grown-up game version of it.
Right.
But like it's a really, really good implementation of it. Genuinely is really, really good. And you're having those same conversations. He has like a favourite card, which is almost like the equivalent of the barbarian card.
Sure.
In the main game, Castle Panic, which basically it's super powerful. It works on any shape and colour basically. And as soon as one of us gets that, we have this little rule that we hand that to my nephew, and that's in his hand.
Nice.
But other than that, he absolutely loves this. And yeah, those games where like it feels like a level playing ground.
Yeah.
Like, we played Pop-Up Pirate over Christmas, and I was trying to think, is there one game out there where actually the fact that you're an adult or a child doesn't matter whatsoever? You're all equally at the same level in this game.
I totally agree.
You can't game it.
There's games like that. Dexterity games, I think, are good for that. Like, classics like Buckaroo and like things that are kind of, your Kaplunks and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, I think there are definitely these games where I think Harbour makes some good ones, especially Rhino Hero.
Oh yes, you lot bought me Rhino Hero Super Battle.
Yeah, and like
that's a great game.
Those games I think are really fun for. Like I wouldn't ever own that game simply because it just wouldn't get enough play at my table. Because it's just not a thing that Alex and I would play that often. But it is definitely it's so funny. It's a game that you get out when you've got young people around and you want to play a board game with them, or you've had a few too many drinks and you don't fancy brass. You fancy just hanging out and playing a silly game, and actually and play is the operative word. There's a lot of I've been reading this book recently about kind of a meta book about tabletop games, and one of the things that they talk about is how play is seen as this very non-adult thing to do, but actually play is just a thing we've always done.
Yeah, and we do it constantly.
And we do it well. We do it constantly, and actually we're starting to re-find this joy in play. And play to me is this great. The thing I love about games of all stripes is that very often they are the great equalizer. They are the thing where you can, again, something like a pop-up pirate, like you mentioned. It's a thing that everybody can enjoy, and everybody is at the same level. The social dynamic is it's not Uncle Peter tells me what to do, go and brush my teeth, go and do whatever it is, and sit there, be quiet, whatever it is. I'm not very nice to my nephew and niece. It's, no, I'm going to compete on equal grounds with Uncle Peter. Like, the great social equalizer there is that I could be beaten by a nephew or a niece. I could be, equally, I could be beaten by, a nan, right? Like, or whoever. I think there's something really wonderful about that, and these moments of like more childish play. I think there's a joy to be had in that when you're sharing that with children. Again, what an honor for you to be able to be like, this is my first Castle Panic. You're going to enjoy this. We're going to enjoy this together. And then there's that promise later on of, and when you're ready, we'll show you this next one.
Oh, definitely.
Well, glorious. That's 2 Tuna Buses.
It certainly is.
It's a fauna bus. Ooh, I don't know if I like that. Let's move on. Stayinginpod@gmail.com. If you want to tell us why fauna bus is not a good phrase. And also, like, drop us a line what you're playing at the moment. Let us know if you're enjoying something. We've had some really good recommendations recently. I've been exploring some of them. We're also on mostly Instagram at this point, I would say.
Yeah.
Should we just make it a 2025 resolution to just say, if you want to see some pictures, it's on Instagram? Because the other ones feel like not as fun anymore. But we're also on But we're also on Board Game Geek. You can see, you can give us a follow there. I'm not sure what that does, but you can. But you can see definitely all of the board games that we've talked about ever on every podcast that we've ever put out, all in a big list there. So if you're like, oh, I wonder if they've covered this because I'm thinking about getting it, we might have done. Go and have a look. It's on there. Same with video games. We have a Steam curator page. Please do give us a follow on there. And then basically that will integrate into your Steam. And if we've talked about a game there, you'll see our little curator recommends come up, and it'll go, oh yeah, these four idiots talked about this game in a few episodes ago, and we can tell you whether or not we like it.
Yeah, and there's also a Spotify playlist where basically anything we talk about on this podcast that has music accompanying it or within it in some way, shape or form, I put that in one of our curated lists depending on mood. So there is Strong Brew for quite intense music. I think perhaps that some of Robin Carolan's music from Nosferatu will make its way on there.
Lovely.
There is Chamomile for more relaxed tunes, Iced Tea for stuff that's just chilled, and then the silly stuff is with sugar.
Excellent. Lovely. Absolutely love it. And if you want to find links to any of this stuff, literally, they're on the app that you're listening to this. Like, if you look at the description, there's like URL links out and all that good stuff. Or you can just go to stayinginpodcast.com. We've got all that good stuff there. Make sure you follow us and subscribe or whatever it is that the platform asks you to do to all of this stuff, and you will get the next episode immediately when it's available, which is usually on the 1st and the 15th. What did we say the outro was always going to be now?
You know what I feel like?